Hey everyone, it's John Pollock alongside Cody Saftik. We're heading into UFC 209 on Saturday night, and by Sunday morning we will have two men that will be holding championships in the UFC's lightweight division. We know that Conor McGregor is the official champion, but there will be an interim champion, whether it be Khabib Nurmagomedov or Tony Ferguson. And I think that come Sunday, we can start looking ahead to this lightweight division and where this division is going to go. Usually the automatic assumption is, well, the two champions will unify the titles. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case immediately, Cody, because Conor McGregor is certainly fishing for this Floyd Mayweather fight. He may fight at other weight classes. George St. Pierre is back in the mix. It could be an extended stay for this interim championship where we do have two champions.
Yeah, we could have a big issue on our hands in the case that if we're just going to go ahead and say Conor McGregor is the number one lightweight in the world, and I do believe that he is, you've got the number 2 and 3 guys in the world fighting right now for the interim championship, and that's a great fight. It's a big fight. The issue with having a big fight is that you can't really go to a smaller fight afterwards. So going from the winner of Khabib versus Tony Ferguson to McGregor, logical move. Big fight, massive fight. But let's say Conor McGregor does go for a different option. Let's say he's trying to get a super fight. Let's say he decides to go to the boxing route. We don't know. Then you have that interim champ that now has to defend. And everything less than the Tony Ferguson, Khabib, or the McGregor fight just seems like less. Now just look at that division for what it is right now. The last guy to hold the title, Eddie Alvarez, well, he's got to work his way back up. He's not getting a title shot anytime soon. And he's got, I believe, a rumored fight with Dustin Poirier on the horizon. You look at the man that held the title before that, and Rafael dos Anjos, not in the division anymore as well. So he's gone. You got contenders, guys like Edson Barbosa is taking on Beneil Dariush, I believe, March 11th. That should provide an interesting challenger. Michael Chiesa, although injured, 4-fight winning streak. Masaru Nduba, Francisco Trinaldo, 7-fight winning streak. But do you know what I mean? If you got announced that it was Ferguson or Khabib versus Trinaldo, 7-fight winning streak, you wouldn't be excited. That's the issue.
This
You're
isn't
having
like
a
middleweight
mega
where you
fight
have
here.
all of these challengers on hold. It's a big...
Yes.
And you couple that with the fact of Donald Cerrone leaving the division. Even
George
Jorge Masvidal
Yep.
leaving the division as well. I mean, it kind of... There's an opening at this moment if you're gearing for that interim title, because we don't know what the state of the actual title is with Conor McGregor. And I just have a hard time imagining Conor McGregor goes from these ideas of these gigantic possible paydays with a Floyd Mayweather and even George St. Pierre, or fights at welterweight versus a Nurmagomedov or Ferguson, which are tough fights, which are not going to have as much box office appeal as these other mega fights that Conor has at his disposal.
Yeah, and it's nothing about a champion not wanting to defend his title. It's just about what makes the most sense for business-wise. If you're Conor McGregor, I'm going to get paid less money to take on a tougher matchup. Would he rather, and listen, well, boxing Floyd Mayweather would be the toughest matchup for him, but the amount of money that he could get in a payday like that makes it worth it. If he's to take on a George St. Pierre, not a good matchup for him, but when you look at what Tony Ferguson and Khabib especially bring against Conor McGregor, he's mostly got to sell the pay-per-view himself. Obviously, they have a big fan base, but it's a tough fight, and he's not making as much money. So I can't see him jumping in. At the same time, he's a proud champion. He's someone that I would assume at some point is going to return and defend one of his titles. I think 45 is off the table for him, so 55 seems like the logical option. But John, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest bit if George St. Pierre prevails against Michael Bisping, that Conor's not going up to 185 by no stretch, but having a super fight with the middleweight champion and saying, you know, I'm the featherweight champ, the lightweight champ.
The lightweight champion versus the middleweight champion at 170 pounds.
I don't know where I read it.
That would be the most UFC fight of 2017.
Well, could you imagine if you've got the featherweight champ and the lightweight champ taking on the former welterweight champ, who's the current middleweight champ? You've got 4 of the titles kind of.
You could fill out the whole poster with the explanation.
Listen, that's what we talk about. Maybe not the product's not getting watered down. It's just it's getting convoluted. Like there's just so much going on that it's hard for a lot of fans to keep up with it. Is it a great fight? Absolutely. But when you look at some of these divisions that are in disarray, middleweight's the one that jumps off at the board at you. 205 with John Jones being out for so long, that jumps up the board at you. 55 is one of your best divisions, your most stacked divisions. But hey, now just like we're talking about, it's kind of becoming a mess a little bit as well. So they gotta make sure that this doesn't become an issue moving forward.
The biggest shift, Cody, is that 10 years ago it was 6 to 7 champions that you could name off the top of your head that were good for X amount of buys on pay-per-view. You could always rely on that. The championship was very much, it was an appeal in and of itself. Today, it's like 6 to 7 names. Those are the quote-unquote championships, because those names represent X amount of buys. And that's what guys are shooting for. They're shooting for certain names rather than certain titles. If you can get a title in the mix, all the better. But it's the names that are now toppling the championships.
Yeah, well, just look at the world of boxing, for example. If you look at boxing in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there's multiple champions. There's multiple big name guys that are able to go out there and draw those fans in. But as time goes on, it becomes a couple names here and there. And now you're only interested in watching the Floyd Mayweathers and the Manny Pacquiaos and the Bernard Hopkins or the Oscar De La Hoyas. You're only interested in watching those pay-per-views. But those guys are going to age at some point. Those guys are going to retire at some point. And you have to build a division. You have to create interest for the sport, not just certain names. And maybe that's kind of the way that MMA is going, in the sense that the casual fan only really wants to see McGregor and see Ronda Rousey and maybe see John Jones. They want to see greatness. They want to see perfection. But as a whole, they don't. It doesn't seem like they love the sport. It doesn't like they're willing to watch the first fight on the undercard and, hey, that might be a great fight. They're not interested in that. They're just interested in the big name. And I've always been worried that MMA would eventually mimic boxing. Maybe it's headed that way right now. I hope not. But regardless, I mean, this is the issue that they've had for a long time now.
Do you think that the part of the, like with Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, I mean, they're doing a lot to try and build up this fight as much as possible. Yeah. And I think they're incentivized by, if this pay-per-view does well, that maybe tips, your Conor McGregor to look at this. If this pay-per-view does a surprisingly high number, they want to take credit for that and be able to prove, hey, we're bringing an audience too. We're not just two great fighters, but we also have an audience behind us that would be viable for a Conor McGregor that is obviously looking at the business of a fight more so than just the fighters involved.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You look at this pay-per-view, and it's a stacked pay-per-view, and it's not being headlined by Ferguson versus Nurmagomedov, but at the same time, you talk to most people, and that's the fight they're most interested in. That's the fight that's selling. Woodley and Thompson, it's not like they're talking smack by no stretch of the imagination. It doesn't seem like there's that real interest in the rematch. Not like, oh, that's the one fight I got to see. When you look at Khabib versus Ferguson, that's the one fight you got to see. I think they're doing a fantastic job in selling it. And honestly, when you just look at numbers for what numbers are, Khabib's fan base is gigantic. There's a lot of people that are behind this guy. And the UFC's, all they got to do is realize if they're getting X amount of buys coming from Russia specifically, or people that are rallying behind him, then he is a star. Him versus McGregor, it's almost you got two nations behind you. And as we've seen with Canada, Canada is not a big country. But when everyone in Canada is behind Georges St-Pierre, he becomes the biggest star. If everyone in Ireland is behind Conor McGregor, he's the biggest star. Russia does that with Khabib, and for that reason, he is a big star. The issue with Tony Ferguson is he could win 20 fights in a row. Not everyone in America will ever always be behind him. So there's a lot of interesting points here, but I do think the fight could sell. It could be huge, but is it big enough for what Conor McGregor wants and what he's been told he could get for other fights? I don't know.
Yeah, we're going to find out. UFC 209 is coming up Saturday night, where Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson will fight, with the winner becoming the interim lightweight champion.